And we don't want steel from Canada because we're making our own steel, and we're having massive steel plants being built right now as we speak.
It's not for sale, won't be for sale ever. But the opportunity is in the partnership.
But never say never.
It was supposed to be a moment of diplomacy, but it turned into a showdown. Just 1 week after Canada's election, newly elected PM Mark Carney walked into the White House. What followed wasn't a meeting. It was a meltdown. During his campaign, Carney talked tough. He even said the relationship between the US and Canada was over as we knew it. But no one expected how badly this meeting would go. From the very beginning, Trump made the situation worse. He doubled down on his aggressive trade policies and dismissed Canada's economic value entirely. "We've got everything we need," he said, brushing off Canada's contributions, its steel, its aluminum, even its cars, as if they were irrelevant. In response, Carney stood his ground. Calmly but firmly, he replied, "Canada is not for sale." But beyond that moment, there was no real progress, no agreement, no new plans, nothing but tension and pretentious smiles for the cameras. One of the biggest sources of conflict is the car industry. Trump made it crystal clear. The tariffs on Canadian cars are staying. He even bragged that Justin Trudeau, the former Canadian Prime Minister, once warned these tariffs could destroy Canada's economy.
If we put a tariff on your cars of 25%, what would that mean to you? He said that would mean the end of Canada. He actually said that to me.
Trump doesn't care. He went further, saying the US shouldn't be importing cars from Canada at all, and that American manufacturers no longer need Canadian steel or aluminum. So what was the point of this meeting? There were no wins, no breakthroughs, and certainly no goodwill. Just a cold, awkward exchange between two leaders who don't trust each other. If the goal was to repair the US-Canada relationship, this meeting might have done the exact opposite. The real question now is, how much worse things can get from here? Before we break it all down, make sure you're subscribed. We bring you the sharpest geopolitical and economic insights anywhere online. When the meeting began, President Donald Trump welcomed Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney after his election win, and quickly took credit for it, joking that he was the greatest thing that happened to Carney. Surprisingly, he might not be wrong. Trump's aggressive trade moves and sharp rhetoric had a major impact on Canadian politics. In early 2025, before Trump got involved, polls showed the Conservative Party leading. Many Canadians, worried about rising prices and a sluggish economy, believed the Conservatives could fix things. But that changed fast when Trump launched new tariffs on Canadian aluminum, softwood lumber, and auto parts, alongside insults calling Canada's economy socialist freeloading and its trade policies cheating. It echoed the 2018 trade war when Trump invoked national security to justify tariffs on Canadian goods, an argument many Canadians still view as deeply unfair. Polls from Angus Reid and Abacus Data showed that support for the Conservatives dropped by about 10 points between March and May 2025, directly after Trump's new wave of pressure. Many voters began to see the Conservatives as too close to Trump and shifted toward the Liberals instead. Led by Mark Carney, a seasoned economist and former head of the Bank of Canada and Bank of England, the Liberal Party presented a calm, competent alternative. Carney promised to protect Canada's economy and stand firm against foreign pressure. Many Canadians saw him as someone who could deal with global problems and stand up to Trump. Ironically, Trump's tactics backfired. What was meant to weaken Carney helped him rise. In a Fox News interview before the election, Trump even said he didn't care if the Liberals won. He said he might actually prefer Mark Carney to win.
The party is going to win now in the next election, most likely. And they were down and out. Isn't that going to make them more hostile to us?
Trump's aggressive behavior made many Canadians feel like their independence was under threat, and they voted accordingly. In the end, Carney's Liberal Party won 169 districts while the Conservatives got only 144. But that was just the beginning. At the White House meeting, Trump again suggested Canada could become the 51st U.S. state, a comment he's floated before. Carney shot it down instantly. Canada is not for sale, He compared Canada to famous properties like Buckingham Palace or the White House, places that are not and will never be on the market. Carney's strong reply reminded everyone that Canada is an independent country and won't be pushed around no matter who is in the White House. Then came the real clash: trade. Trump said he wants to renegotiate the USMCA. He complained that the U.S. was losing too much money and claimed America had a trade deficit of $200 billion with Canada. That number is not supported by facts, but Trump repeated it anyway. Economists and analysts quickly pointed out that the real trade numbers are much lower and more balanced. Still, Trump insisted the U.S. was being taken advantage of. Let's break down what this means. A trade deficit happens when a country buys more goods from another country than it sells to them. Trump believes the U.S. is buying too much from Canada and not selling enough back. But the reality is more complex. The U.S. depends heavily on Canadian imports like oil, natural gas, electricity, aluminum, and car parts. These items are critical for the American economy to function. Moreover, the U.S. depends heavily on Canadian imports to power its economy. Canada supplies over 4 million barrels of oil per day to the U.S. and even reached 4.9 million barrels in July of 2024. Canadian electricity flows into key U.S. states like New York and Vermont. U.S. automakers rely on Canadian-made auto parts to keep factories running in Michigan and Ohio. And Canadian aluminum is used in everything from construction to military aircraft. Trump's obsession with the trade deficit ignores how tightly the two economies are intertwined. Cutting off Canadian imports won't just hurt Canada, it will disrupt U.S. supply chains, raise prices, and threaten American jobs in the industries Trump claims to defend. Why does Trump keep targeting Canada, even when the data shows both countries rely on each other? Yet Trump made one thing clear: car tariffs are staying.
We want to make our own cars. We don't really want cars from Canada. And we put tariffs on cars from Canada, and at a certain point, it won't make economic sense for Canada to build those cars.
That's a major blow. Canada is a key supplier of cars and components to U.S. manufacturers. Tariffs risk paralyzing this integrated system, harming both Canadian factories and American automakers. Steel, aluminum, electronics, packaging, prices on both sides of the border could spike. In the end, this meeting between Trump and Carney didn't bring any good news. It was not a real negotiation. There were no new trade deals, no compromise, and no signs of progress. It was more of a photo opportunity than a real working session. Both leaders were stuck to their positions, and the problems between the two countries remain unsolved. Despite all of Trump's aggressive talk, Prime Minister Mark Carney stayed calm and professional. He used a strategy known as gray rocking, which means not reacting emotionally and not giving in to provocation. Carney also talked about trade. He said he was open to modernizing the USMCA, but only in a way that works for both countries. He emphasized the importance of cooperation, mutual respect, and shared goals. He said the two countries need to rebuild trust and work together as partners. But none of this seemed to change Trump's mind. The tariffs remain. The U.S. is still demanding more trade concessions, and there's no new trade agreement in sight. Carney tried to offer dialogue and peace, but Trump responded with demands. This situation is more than just a political disagreement. It's a warning sign that the relationship between the U.S. and Canada is heading into dangerous territory. Trade wars, insults, and political games are replacing the long history of friendship and cooperation between the two countries. This could hurt jobs, raise prices, and weaken economies on both sides of the border. Trump's actions have created fear and frustration in Canada, but they've also sparked a new sense of unity. Canadians saw their country being threatened, and they chose leaders who would defend it. But this is far from being the only problem Canada has to deal with. Following Canada's most recent federal election, political tensions have deepened, reviving an old but powerful question. Could parts of Canada actually separate? This time, the spotlight is on Alberta and Quebec, two provinces with very different identities and grievances, yet both now discussing separating from Canada. Their reasons diverge sharply. Alberta's frustration stems largely from economic policies and perceived federal overreach, while Quebec's movement is rooted in cultural and historical aspirations for autonomy. Despite their different origins, both stories are converging toward a similar outcome: a challenge to Canada's unity. Let's start with Alberta. The province has long been a powerhouse in Canada's economy, primarily because of its vast natural resources. Rich in oil and natural gas, it contributes billions to the national GDP through energy exports, corporate taxes, and employment. Yet despite this economic importance, many Albertans feel increasingly alienated by federal policies that appear to target their most valuable industries. The federal government, led by Prime Minister Mark Carney and the Liberal Party, has imposed climate initiatives such as carbon taxes and limits on pipeline construction. These measures, though designed to fight climate change, are seen by many in Alberta as economically harmful and politically punitive. Premier Danielle Smith has acknowledged these frustrations. While she personally does not support separation, she has made it clear that the sentiment is growing. Smith has stated that if enough Albertans sign a petition, a referendum on separation could be held as early as 2026. In response, the provincial government launched Alberta Next, a campaign that includes town hall meetings and the formation of a negotiation team aimed at pressuring Ottawa for better terms. The subtext is loud and clear. Alberta wants more control over its destiny, and it is not afraid to consider drastic options. Meanwhile, Quebec's struggle is older and more complex. With its distinct French-speaking identity, the province has long sought to preserve its unique culture within a largely English-speaking Canada. This quest has led to two historic referendums on independence, in 1980 and 1995, both of which failed, though the 1995 vote came close. Recently, however, public support for separation has waned. A new Léger poll shows that only 29% of Quebecers currently back independence, the lowest figure in decades. One unexpected reason is nationalism of a different kind. When US President Donald Trump made controversial remarks suggesting the US might consider annexing Canada, many Quebecers rallied around Canadian unity in defiance of foreign threats. Still, the movement is far from dead. The Parti Québécois, PQ, continues to push for sovereignty and has pledged to hold another referendum by 2030 if it wins the next provincial election. The potential loss of either Alberta or Quebec would not only reshape Canada's geography and identity, but it would also trigger seismic economic consequences. Alberta is arguably the energy backbone of Canada, with its oil and gas industry generating billions in export revenue and sustaining tens of thousands of jobs. Its withdrawal would send shockwaves through Canadian energy markets, potentially reducing federal revenues and undermining investor confidence across the country. Such a move would not just be a political rupture, it would be an economic earthquake. Let's begin with economic weight. Alberta has a GDP of over 353 billion Canadian dollars, making it the fourth largest provincial economy after Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia. Despite having a much smaller population, Alberta contributes approximately 16% of Canada's national GDP, even though it only accounts for about 11% of the population. This outsized contribution is largely due to its rich natural resources, particularly oil and natural gas. Alberta holds the third largest proven oil reserves in the world, after Saudi Arabia and Venezuela, primarily in its vast oil sands. It also produces over 60% of Canada's crude oil and more than 70% of its natural gas. So you can imagine how badly the Canadian government wants to keep Alberta in the fold. But the cracks are deep, and the pressure is real. With Alberta asserting economic independence and Quebec still flirting with sovereignty, Canada is facing not just a political dilemma, but a potential identity crisis. Can the Federation hold? Or are we witnessing the slow unraveling of one of the world's most stable democracies? We'll be tracking every step of this story, so make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on. More sharp, in-depth economic analysis is coming soon. See you in the next video.